I call the member for Wright.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I rise to speak on the Appropriations Bill number 1, 2012-13 and the related bills. I'd first like to bring to the House's attention the noise that the government make with reference to the current budget surplus. And I remind the House that the surplus budget before us at the moment is an indicative figure of $1.5 billion, which they intend to reach at a period of time, 12 months from July 1 this year. So, and because of the thinness or the relatively small forecasted surplus budget of $1.5 billion, one needs to, in order to test the authenticity or to test the integrity of this government's ability to forecast out 12 months, it's prudent that we go back 12 months and see what the government forecasted that this budget would deliver us in the way of a deficit. And I remind the House that just outside the 12-month period, back in the MyEFO period before the last budget, I think we were forecasting a $10 billion deficit. And at the last budget, that increased from $10 billion to $22.7 billion. I mean, that in itself, a $10 billion just got it wrong, is unfathomable. However, that's not all. That's not all. From the $22.7 billion at the last budget through the recent MyEFO figures, that figure increased to $37 billion that they were forecasting that this deficit would be. So we've gone from 10, 22, 37, and more than likely on June 30, the deficit that will be delivered by this government will end up within the vicinity of $44 billion. So from 10 to 44, how could Treasury, the expert advice, this government who rely on the waves of support that they have to get these numbers right, have got it so fundamentally wrong? From 10 to 44, and yet we are led to believe they are leading this nation in a false sense of security that in 12 months from this point in time will deliver a $1.5 billion surplus. Time will tell. Time will tell. Now, I'm not one to stand up here and bash the government on every front. Mind you, there is a heap of fodder, but the economy does have some strong indicators. Figures that any nation in the world would be happy with. But I'd like to remind the government that are those indicators, and it's in paying the compliment to the government on some of the strengths in the economy, because we have to be mindful in this House that there is a wider audience. It's not just this room, it's not just this nation. There is a global audience that looks on at Australia, and being a net investor of capital, we need to make sure that we send a message to those capital markets that Australia has a strong footing. I'd suggest that one of the reasons that we have some of those strengths in those indicators, those financial indicators, is because of the position that the coalition left this government in financially. I mean, we had money in the bank. Money in the bank. What a great place to be from, when it comes to dealing with appropriations. And we had no debt. Again, what a fantastic, going into a global financial crisis, I mean, the government make the position that we are the envy of the world. Well, I would suggest that the government would have been envious. We would have been the envy of the world of the figures that were handed to this government. I'd also like to bring to the attention of the House some of the comments made by some of those in the government with reference to spending as a percentage of GDP. And they're making, the noises that are being made are those along the lines that, that this government has a better track record on spending as a percentage of GDP. And I thought that was quite interesting. So I actually went to the 2012-13 Budget Papers number 1 book, and I went to the percentage of GDP payment. And surprise, surprise, in the last year of the coalition government, the Howard government, our percentage of GDP was 23.1%, and the year before that, 23.4%. So when it comes to saying that this government's got a better track record on spending, the papers themselves say that in 2008-9, Labor spending was 25.2% of GP, increased payments than what we left. For the following year, in 2009-10, 26%. 2010-11, 24.7%. And in 2011-12, 25.1%. None of those figures coming anywhere close to our spending, our last budget spending as a percentage to GDP. So I just ask the House to be mindful when Labor colleagues of mine make a point that this is not a big spending government. I'd also like to bring to the House the House's attention to my concern with reference to the debt and the interest payments. Now, you'll often hear the rhetoric of the government, saying that, oh, it's only 7.2% of GDP, oh, it's only 8% of GDP, now 9%, or whatever it is. And I'd use the analogy from the global financial crisis that the majority of those countries that are in trouble or that are now struggling to service their interest payments on that debt, and I would suggest to them that by following their lead of going and borrowing more money isn't going to fix our problem. Madam Deputy Speaker, it is not going to fix our problem. Madam Deputy Speaker, we are the envy of the world, and one can only imagine what they would have thought of the financial position of the Howard government when we had no debt and no money in the bank. And I bring the House's attention to a recent paper conducted by an ex-IMF senior executive who's now a Harvard law professor, Professor Ken Rogoff, who tracked Australia's spending and indicated that per head per capita, Australia had the highest rate of spending of any Western nation, the highest rate of spending after the GFC period. One has to question as to whether or not we overboiled our spending there. The real question with reference to the Appropriations Bill is to the Australian people, and that is, can the economy or the finances of this nation, can the economy and the finances of this nation, with the waste and mismanagement, be managed better? Can we do a better job as a government? Can we do a better job as an opposition? Can the government do a better job managing the books? Has this government wasted money? In times when we should have been prudent, has this government wasted money? And I suppose you only need to have a look at the installation program. Not the government's finest hour. Not the government's finest. And I think, with all sincerity, I mean, I pray that those hundreds, or was it just on 200 homes that were burnt to the ground as a result of that program, have got their lives back in order. The outrageous overspends on the BER. We would have stimulated the economy. We would have stimulated the economy, but we would have spent it in different sectors. And I'm more than happy for you to take these ideas on board. I mean, we've got a number of gridlocks with reference to our resources sector, and you didn't understand the two-speed economy. We would have, mate, you get to have your chance in a sec. Muscle up and take this in, because you're part of the problem. We would have stimulated the economy in a different perspective. We would have invested in ports. We would have created the jobs. The jobs needed to be stimulated. The BER did that, but I don't suggest that it was a great return on investment. We could have created jobs into a capital investment that potentially had a return on investment that had the capacity to service their own debt. And of course, there was the $900 cheques to the dead people. I mean, that was a shocker. And recently we had, to a lesser amount, with reference to the waste, $526,000 spent on finding 11 ABC directors with reference to our television broadcasting. That we can't go past the $36 million on advertising and the carbon tax. That just forgets to mention the carbon tax. And of course, the government's management of the asylum seekers and our border protection. The list goes on, Mr Deputy Speaker. But to mention a few more, the set-top box was something that I believe that the government could have handled better. Grocery watch, again, fuel watch. I mean, anything with the word watch after it that the government set up could have been handled better. The Australian network tender for Sky, winning the tender but not getting it. Only under this government could something like that have happened. We heard earlier on in the House with reference to some studies, the $314,000 study to see if birds were shrinking study. We had the $140,000 investment study to monitor the sleeping habits of snails, and the $210,000 study on studying the early history of the moon. And And there's more. However, you get the idea when it comes to managing the nation's finances. What I'm suggesting is that can it be managed better? And you would have to be blind, Freddie, not to think, even with the politics outside, that it could be managed better. Let's talk about jobs. I mean, this government talks about, with reference to stimulating the economy, that it's all about jobs, 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 jobs. Well, you don't have to take my word for it. Go and have a look at what the growth rate was in the calendar year of 2011. It was 0. So for every job that came on, a job was lost. Every job that came on, a job was lost. Insolvencies, with reference to this nation. I haven't picked up the point, but so I won't comment on it, actually. Uncontrollable increases in the public service. So I think there's been an increase since the government come to power of over 13,420 full-time equivalents, and you can grab that also from the budget papers, page 654. Are Labor's policy driving growth? I ask myself that question with a hand on the heart. Are the policies that Labor are putting in place for this government really driving the growth of the two-speed economy? And let's have a look at the resources sector. And I struggle to find anything that is driving that resources sector from a fiscal perspective. The real growth in that sector is coming from demand from our trading partners. China, with a population of 1.3 billion people, their export markets is 2 main ports. America is at about 20%, Europe's about 22%. Both of those economies have softened. So we're still picking up growth here as a nation on the back of their domestic growth, as we have a more westernised, we see a more westernised development of their 1.3 population. This government's in trouble. This government's in trouble with the polls. Not all of us take a lot of notice of the polls, and to dig their way out of trouble, they're spending money, and it's spending money they don't have. And in a household budget, I mean, that's not a prudent way to spend money. And they're spending money borrowed, and spending money that will hopefully come from the mining boom. And I'd just like to bring to the House's attention Twiggy Forrester's comments the other day at Fortescue Metals when he gave an address down at the other day down at the press gallery. And he said the government's handling of the mining boom was not that dissimilar to a group of guys establishing that they had a Melbourne Cup winner that had the potential in the way of a racehorse, and that had the potential to earn the millions and millions and millions of dollars. But after it ran its first race, instead of getting the horse ready for the second race, they celebrated by eating the horse. I thought that was appropriate on the way that the external sectors of the market are commenting on Labor's handling of the resources sector. Another interesting statistic with reference to the managing of the economy is the Essential Report survey conducted in May of 2012 and asked which party they trusted to deal with another global financial crisis. Most voters picked Liberal Party at 42% over Labor at, guess what, 25%. Support for the government's economic management has collapsed this year because asked the same question in 2011, Labor's record support was 31 compared to Liberals' 40. And like I said, that's an open survey conducted by the Essential Report. Madam Deputy Speaker, I do want to just bring the attention back to the Coalition's capacity to eliminate the waste and the Coalition's capacity to eliminate mismanagement, and more importantly, in the second speed economy, to restore confidence. To restore confidence to our manufacturing sector, to restore confidence to our tourism sector, to restore confidence and to get away from the internal Labor constant news cycle of who's going to be the leader this week. Can the economy be run better? Well, yes, they can, and there's a heap of room for improvement. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.